Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm privileged to welcome an author who's written some amazing work, and we're going to talk about that from Greater Noida, India, Abha Sharma. Abha, welcome to the show.
Thank you for inviting me. Pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Abha is an author of a book titled Vediquant, which is with Vedantic truth in quantum science. And Abha is also a life coach. So, Abha, before we talk about your book, tell me about your own journey in brief and what inspired you to explore the connection between Vedanta and quantum science.
All right. It's, I think, very difficult to define anyone's life in just a few sentences, but no, I have a term. I call it the algorithm of the universe. Somehow there are certain factors that come together to shape a person, to shape a person's life. It's not destiny. It's a very dynamic algorithm, depending on your thoughts, your intentions, your actions also. So in my case, there were certain factors like I grew up with a fiercely scientific temper, the kind that would not accept anything without logic. But I was also growing up in the beautiful land of Himachal Pradesh. It's a beautiful town called Solan.
Yeah.
So there's something in the air over there. I think I kind of understand why the sages go to the Himalayas for their spiritual quest. So it affects you for life. Uh, Along with that, I grew up in a very open environment where intellectual quest was very much encouraged, both in school and at home. My father being a very well-known, respected journalist with the Tribune. So I grew up with an exposure to lots of things, myriad factors, all at the same time. So it kept me getting exposed to a number of things. I think from the beginning, science and arts, literature, spirituality were going hand in hand for me. I graduated in science, but I did a master's in English literature. And after that, I happened to qualify a prestigious exam, the UGC NET in English. And from there, my life took a very different direction, like everything that had to do with language. But somehow, science kept on fascinating me. So I kept on learning on the sides. Sometimes I used to think like I could very well have been a happy microbiologist working in some remote laboratory. But my professors, my parents, my even my tutor at the Writers Bureau, he was Peter Whitbread, an Emmy Award winner. And I remember his words. He was like, one thing I know for sure, Abha, that one day I'll see your name on a bookshelf. That meant a lot for a 20-year-old. So, but for a long time, I kept running away from writing. The rebellious me just did not want to do what everyone else wanted me to do. So, but after I had my two kids, I decided to become a full-time mother and a part-time everything else. I was fortunate enough to carry on a career line. So worked in a corporate environment in online education for a long time. And at that time in the 2000s, online education was mostly concentrated in the US. So that gave me some nice global exposure. And on the sidelines, I kept writing. But writing picked up pace only when I decided to take a complete break from work and focus on writing. So here I am, like written 5 books now.
Amazing.
So,
yeah. Fantastic. So let's talk about your latest book, Vediquant.
Yeah.
Can you briefly explain the core principles of Vedanta? And most of us will probably be able to say that Vedanta is the end of the Vedas, but at the beginning maybe of the Upanishads or whatever. But how do they relate to quantum science?
Exactly. To explain this, I would need to give a little background. Like, it all starts with questions actually for all of us, I guess. So there were some difficult times in life when I actively started looking for answers, like making sense out of life, what it is, what it means, what is death, things like that. So somehow, fortunately for me, I was able to study science and spirituality parallelly. So But the eye-opening part of it was when I started browsing through the Upanishads. There were times when I would just read a verse and be stunned by how correctly it echoed what quantum science was trying to say. But for a long time I kept it to myself. Because I would be the last person on earth to be accused of propagating pseudoscience. That's not what I want to do, because for me, scientific quest has the same sanctity as spirituality has for people. So I kept my study on, and during that exploration, I came to know that the two approaches are entirely different. Like I mentioned in my book, the two travelers moving on different vehicles, different approaches, but the destination is the same. Right. So currently there is a lot of noise about trying to quickly find similarities between quantum science and spirituality, Vedanta especially. But we need to be very careful about that comparison, because it's not correct to draw a word-to-word parallel. No, it would be very faulty. We need to understand in a very nuanced way. Like, the approaches are the same. It's just like saying, supposing you want to go from Delhi to Mumbai, and I also want to go from Delhi to Mumbai. So you decide to take a flight, I decide to go by road. And by chance, supposing we just crossed Jaipur, would you accuse me, you reached there earlier, would you accuse me of copying you? So that's a wrong approach. And you might say, like, okay, did you see Jaipur on the way? I said, I did. He said, then you're copying me. So that's a wrong approach. Both are different, separated by centuries. But the beauty of it is that they're trying to reach the same truth. The core principle of Vedanta is very simple and can be explained in any of the Mahavakyas, just one sentence. You can say Aham Brahmasmi, you can say Pragyanam Brahma, you can say Tattvam Asi. No, Soham Asmi. Take any of the Mahavakyas and they only talk about oneness. So that's one thing that science is also striving for. Science, by its very nature, talks of oneness. Now, you cannot have an American nitrogen molecule or an Indian oxygen molecule. When scientists study, even neuroscience, they don't study an American neuron or an Indian neuron. No, it's wrong to diversify in the sense of like cultural differences, region, religion. So both talk of oneness at the very basic level. But with classical science, things were a little different. There was a paradigm shift with quantum science, and that brought it closer to Vedanta. Another wonderful aspect that connects both of them is openness. Now, Vedanta is, like you said, the end of the Upanishads are the end of the Vedas, and that is what Vedanta is. But what do we mean by the end? The end means the highest teaching, right? The highest teaching. So again, there's a lot of noise about, it's become turned into a cacophony of sounds, meaningless sounds, like how Vedanta, is actually equivalent to this thing. See, I've got very fond of analogies after studying Vedanta. So allow me to just mention one more.
Please do.
Yeah. See, supposing you're a person living in a village and you're passing by a well and you see a person drowning over there. Now, what would your reaction be? You'll just run, just turn and try to look for a rope of sufficient length. Supposing you turn and you find a rope lying just right over there of the correct length, so the rope that can save the man. What will you do? You'll just throw the rope and try to pull the person out. What if you just take the rope in your hands, flaunt it, and you go around the village beating a drum about how wonderful it is that you found the rope at the right place of the right length, and that rope could have saved the person's life. That is what people are doing. They are so excited, and quite understandably so, quite excited about ancient wisdom that they forget the entire purpose of that wisdom is to help yourself. In that analogy, the person who was drowning is you, and the person who could have saved you is you. And the rope is Vedanta.
Mm.
So that's what we overlook. We tend to be very proud of our ancient knowledge, but we don't want to use it in our lives.
Correct. I agree. And, that could be a topic of a separate discussion on why we hesitate to draw upon so much knowledge that exists.
Right.
And we still reach out to what is probably more modern or more contemporary, even though I believe our scriptures are as contemporary as they are today as probably when they were written.
Absolutely, they are.
But Abha, moving on, you spoke about the 4 Mahavakyas, and there's a whole subject of consciousness, which is whether it's Aham Brahman or any of the other 3. How do you address the concept of consciousness in quantum theory?
Right. This is a sticky patch for science, actually. Vedanta is absolutely clear about what consciousness is. Everything is consciousness and in consciousness. Right. But for science, things are moving in a direction in which Vedanta is pointing. They currently are, they have lots of differences right now, because currently neuroscientists are trying to, work on this theory that consciousness somehow arises out of the brain or out of the mind or thoughts, which is quite contrary to what Vedanta points to. Consciousness gives rise to the mind. It's not the other way around. But, with the coming of quantum physics, there's been a great shift. That's what made me excited about exploring the connection. What quantum science does here is to point towards a concept called qualia. Qualia are supposed to be the basic elements of consciousness. There's been quite, a good reception of qualia among physicists also. Now, what is amazing is that qualia are supposed to be ineffable. They cannot be explained in any known medium of expression. They're beyond language, right? So that is what consciousness of Vedanta is. It cannot be expressed in any known medium. No. So I think they're moving towards an agreement over there.
And are there any philosophical parallels that you have been able to draw in your book between Vedanta and quantum science?
Right. See, that's the beauty of Vedanta. You can express it in one word. That's oneness.
Absolutely.
So all the Upanishads, the 108 Upanishads, 10 principal ones, all are striving to push forth only this point. No, oneness. That's the basic philosophical parallel. Like science talks about the unity of life. No. And both another philosophical thing, when we use the word philosophy, we tend to expect it's going to be something complicated, very sophisticated. Sometimes it's very simple. It can be a simple thing like an approach. So Vedanta's approach is inquiry-based. See, the basic structure of studying Vedanta is, defined in 3 steps. It's called Shravana, Manana, Nididhyasana, which means to hear and then to contemplate, think over it. And Nididhyasana means to try it out for yourself. Vedanta is very clear. If you don't feel it for yourself, don't accept it. Try another method. So that's very important. Right. Inquiry into the nature of reality through your everyday experiences.
Right.
Science has the same approach.
Yeah.
You find something, you form a hypothesis, you try to prove it through empirical observations, and then it's considered something done.
Very interesting. So now let me ask you a question from another perspective. How have historical interpretations of the Vedas influenced modern scientific thought? And I know suddenly we are seeing a lot of conversations about how the Western scientists have relied on the Vedas, and this latest movie, Oppenheimer, talks about it. So it's all over.
It is, yeah, right. So historically, there have been some very beautiful interpretations of Vedantic philosophy. Through the centuries, we've had Vidyaranya Swami, we've had the Adi Shankaracharya, and many such people. There's Gaurapadas Karika. I think those were works of, they're iconic works, incomparable. But in contemporary times, I think, I believe that the most knowledgeable teachers of Vedanta are somehow sitting in quiet corners. I think the loud voices that we hear all around are not necessarily the most knowledgeable.
Absolutely right.
So we need to identify the correct scholars to understand the interpretations that they have made. Now, I believe in the contemporary time, Swami Gambhirananda of the Vedanta Society. He was, I think one of the most highest minds of our times, if I may use that term. So I wouldn't be the correct person to comment on the historical interpretations in the contemporary times. But yes, I'm not a subscriber to the idea that science has copied from Vedanta. The two approaches are entirely different. It's wrong to even think so.
Well said.
And like you mentioned, Oppenheimer, see, it's very understandable if physicists quote from Vedanta because scientists are, by very nature, they're very honest, sincere people trying to reach the reality of existence. So when they find something that has a similar concept in any part of the world, they're bound to be fascinated by this. There's lots of quotations from Schrodinger, from Niels Bohr, saying how they were fascinated with the Upanishads. It was bound to happen because they were open-minded people.
Correct.
They were open to accept those things also.
Very well said. And, when you talk, whether it's an Einstein or whether you talk of more recent, there is a lot of knowledge exchange that has happened between our scriptures and the West, but somewhere along the line it got lost. But my next question to you, Abha, is how does your own research suggest a deeper interconnectedness between Vedanta and quantum science?
Right. This is something that is that fascinated from me from the word go, and this is what my entire book is based on. But this time frame is too short to go into the details, so I would just quickly mention here that as I went on researching different aspects of Vedanta and different aspects of quantum science, I was stunned by how amazingly they echoed each other. It was like I spent sleepless nights thinking over, doubting myself whether I'm reading it correctly. How could both of them be talking of the same thing? But it's like, this is one existence. All the differences that we've created are human made. So one existence can have only one truth. That is what Vedanta, is telling you endlessly. And that is what science is striving for. This is one existence. And as you go through studying quantum science and you realize probably what you see locally is not the truth. So the truth might be something else, hidden, veiled by Maya. And that is what science tells you. What you see with your eyes is probably not the truth. It's something beyond that. So to describe that in detail would require a larger amount of time, but yeah.
I understand. But, again, given the time that we have, I would like to ask you a few more questions.
Sure.
My next question, Abha, is that do you believe that the convergence of Vedanta and quantum science points to universal truths?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Definitely. See, the convergence is still sometime far in the future. And we might not see, I think we will not see it in our lifetimes. But the convergence is bound to happen. The factor that changed everything for science was quantum science. The approaches have changed. There's more open-mindedness. We can accept things that sound surreal. We can accept things that sound too philosophical, even magical. So the convergence definitely points to oneness of the universe. I'm convinced about that. And basic unity of not just life, of all of matter, and what that we see like visible or invisible in the universe. The convergence is bound to happen. I don't know when. Maybe if we don't destroy ourselves on this planet, this species. So maybe we'll live to see that.
Absolutely. But as a follow-up question, are there any aspects of Vedanta that you believe can be explained or validated through quantum science?
There are many, actually. There are quite a few. But let me just take the example of, aspect of time. The the Upanishads never give a lot of importance to time.
Hmm.
Because time is an aspect of Maya. It's like Desh, Kala, Nimitta, that space, time, and causation are taken together, which means they are not real. They have only a relative truth, a subjective truth that is important to perceive this world. Time is kind of put on the sidelines. They say time arises out of ignorance. That's what the Upanishads say.
Yeah.
And they say beyond the mind, the problems of time, past, present, future do not exist. This changed with Einstein's, theory of relativity. Space-time was combined together. So time ceased to have an independent existence.
Mm-hmm.
No, space-time, just like Desh, Kal, and causation, which is Nimitta. So just imagine this scenario like space-time being the cause of gravity. And science, quantum science rather, is now coming to believe that time is probably emergent. It began with the beginning of this universe.
Right.
So it's not eternal. Right. Another aspect is that of space, which is Akash in Vedanta. Now, space in quantum science is all pervading. And it was the first of the elements that was present at the beginning of this universe. Now, it's important to say this universe because there's a common misconception that science believes that that life began with the Big Bang. It's not that way. Science also believes in cyclical universes. They are created, destroyed, dissolved. So space was the first thing that was over there. The particles came later and elements were formed later. This is exactly what Vedanta says. So, but how quantum science, like to get to your question more specifically, like you said, explaining Vedantic concepts through quantum science, it's like when we read an abstract concept in Vedanta, it doesn't really strike us that much. Okay, they are saying Akash was the first of elements to come, and then came fire, then came earth and all. When you understand it through the lens of quantum science, you can see it part by part. The Higgs boson, which is in a wrong way called the God particle. It's actually a Higgs field.
Yeah.
It's the basic fundamental field or particle that provides mass to every atom.
Right.
If there was no Higgs boson, there could not have been any matter over here.
Very well said.
That's what the concept of Akasha is. Akasha gives rise to all other things. So if you read about, the abstract descriptions in the Upanishads, like how the elements were created, doesn't make sense. But when you come to quantum science, you go part by part and it starts making sense immediately.
Well said. So I have time for two more questions for you, Abha. My next question is, how does your work and your book contribute to the understanding of life and existence from both a scientific and a spiritual standpoint?
Right. For me, science and spirituality are not different because both are talking about me and the universe I live in. So I try to imagine as the boundaries dissolve. This is one universe, this is our life, and the boundaries are totally artificial. So to me, both the disciplines are just trying to tell us to leave our egos behind, to identify the ego, to move from ignorance to knowledge, which is the very purpose of the Upanishads, in the sense that science tells you through different things, like the various discoveries, and people like me feel excited about those discoveries. And when you go through any aspect of spirituality, even if it is bhakti, even if it is bhajan, all those things are just trying to tell you that this is one universe. This is life that is to be cherished. You exist, you experience things, you think. So for me, the message is just one: identify this universe and life as one and cherish it.
Great response. And my last question to you, Abha, and this is that what future research do you think is needed to further explore connections between Vedanta and quantum science? And there is so much more, so many more scriptures that we have. which go well beyond just the Vedas and the Upanishads.
Right, correct. I think future research, scientists are of a mindset that they won't easily take to a philosophical concept because they rely on empirical data, they rely on calculations, mathematics. I think, like we talked earlier about convergence, future research is all dependent on how willing people from two sides are to work with each other. I don't think that is going to happen anytime soon. But research by physicists who understand Vedanta, this is actually a vicious cycle, because if they do any research, Vedanta would be like, we already told you so. And if Vedantic philosophers try to go through the path of science, they say that's a long path. We already know about that. So it's a very rough patch combining the two philosophies. So I won't really say that future research is actually needed. I would rather say that there has to be a mutual respect for both the disciplines, where a harmonious dialogue can happen, and both can realize that, yes, we are talking about the same thing. The problem is that we humans tend to find utility in everything.
Correct.
And there was this incident when the 2022 Nobel Prize was announced, and people like me who had been studying quantum science for a while were so excited about it. It was a festival for me. It was a day of celebration. The discoveries were amazing. But what was happening was like throughout the world, the headlines were more focused on how this discovery can help us make better quantum computers, can help encrypted communication, can make human lives more technologically advanced. That was a kind of a disappointing thing for me, because we forget to celebrate the beauty of the discovery. So technological advancement or more research is, I think, something that we need to see in the future.
Fascinating. And on that note, Abha, thank you so much for speaking to me about your own amazing journey, your love for the Vedas. Thank you. And of course, quantum science. Thank you for talking to me about your book, Vediquant. I'm going to ask all our viewers and listeners to go and check out Abha Sharma's book on Amazon. It's published by Rupa, who are also my publishers. Thank you for speaking to me about so many different aspects of the Vedas and quantum science. I know we didn't have enough time to go dive really deep into some of these, but maybe I'll schedule another conversation with you to pick up one or two topics and go really deep onto that.
Entirely my pleasure.
And good luck to you.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to the brand called You Videocast and Podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the brand called You.